Was Fable 3 truly the worst game in the series? Hey, what's up guys, my name is Crash, and today we're back with another retrospective, finishing up the Fable series. After this one, I do have a couple of things in mind for what is going to be coming next. I'm thinking of a game that has a battle axe and a guy playing an electric guitar, and pretty much he is like in a hack and slash RTS heavy metal world. You can probably get the gist of what I'm going to be playing next. I just want to put it out there that that is going to be the next video that is going to be coming out. And if this video gets a like goal of like 50 likes, I'll try to get it out as quick as possible. But let's get right into Fable 3. Fable 3 starts around the same way that Fable 2 does, where you get to decide which character you want to play, which is either a prince or a princess this time around. So you're not going to be starting from like the low end, you are going to be starting from like the high place, I guess you can put it that way. And it starts with another cinematic, and the cinematics in Fable are always beautiful. They just absolutely look great. I love the way that they do them each and every time. Once you get into this game, it's the same way as Fable 2. You get to see how Power Stone and all that has evolved over the years, and I really enjoy that little idea. The only issue I have, honestly, with this game, like from the beginning of it, is I kind of just don't like the time period. I really didn't want an industrial type game. I was fine with like the guns and rifles and all that, like in Fable 2, but I feel like this was too much of an evolution over time that kind of made the game a little bit iffy, and I'll go into why that is later on. After this beautiful cinematic of watching a chicken get beat the hell up, you finally get to see your character and get to make your first ever decision in the game. It's nothing important, it's just what clothes you want to pick. You get woken up by your butler, which is named Jasper, and he just pretty much tells you to choose one of the or the other. And after you choose it, it really doesn't do anything. It's just to show you that this game is going to have some type of decisions, just like the first and second game. After you choose them, you end up going outside and you go to meet with your girlfriend or whatever you want it to be, or boyfriend, whatever. And when you actually get up to them, you get to finally see the new interaction menu. The new interaction menu is honestly not that bad. I think it's kind of cool. Like, it's cool to have like face-to-face interactions, but there is some major issues with it, and I'll go into that now. The new interaction menu is honestly pretty cool. I like the idea that all the new interactions are a lot more personable, like when you do a hug, it actually hugs the person, kiss, or punch, whatever you want it to be. But the only issue with it, honestly, is that it is only one-on-one type of interactions. It makes it very tedious later on if you're trying to build up multiple relationships at once, just because it is mono and mono. You have to just only be talking to that person to build the relationship, which really sucks because when you're trying to get like groups of people to like you, you have to go to each and every person separately. While in Fable 2, I think it did it a lot better. Where you just use a scroll wheel and you pick whatever interaction you want to do, and once you pick it, you just do it. And after that, it's all done. Like, everyone around in that area will either like it or hate it depending on what you're trying to do, which is what I like. I feel like it was a cool innovation to add the idea that you can now decide if you want to do it like face to face. I think it should have been two different ways where you get to decide if you want to do it like that or do it one-on-one. But I guess they decided that the one-on-one thing was better, but there's also another issue with it, and that is building friendships. Friendships and relationships are fine and dandy, but there is a lot of major issues with it, and I'll be going into that later just because it plays into the leveling system of this game, which is by far the most god-awful thing I want to talk about. But let's get back onto the plot. After you meet up with this girl, either you hug or kiss them, and then you pretty much head throughout the castle to see different interactions that played no major role into the story, but you just get to decide them. It pretty much is the way of shaping your character on morality-wise. Like, you go to the kitchen, you can either be very stubborn or give them a passionate speech, and after you do that, there's a whole bunch of other things you get to do. But this is where you meet one of the more of the main characters in the game. And this is where you end up meeting Walter. Walter is by far one of the best characters throughout all of the games, and same with most of the cast in this game. Honestly, Fable 3 has one of the best casts that you'll ever see throughout the series. A lot of people will say Jack of Blades is amazing, and I do agree. Jack of Blades is one of the best characters in the game, and same with a lot of the characters in Fable 2, but they just do not light a candle to what happened in Fable 3, at least in my opinion. There's a lot of characters in this game that, like, I feel like if they weren't here, this game would have been even worse than where it was. These characters are actually interesting, they have great dialogue, they're at least somewhat witty, stuff like that. And I'm really happy that they were able to add stuff like this. And it made the game a lot more interesting. It made me want to play through it even more. When I first ever played through it, I played this game hundreds of times by now, but it just had an amazing cast on the side. But after you end up meeting Walter, you end up heading towards the training room. As you head off to the training room, there ends up being a protest outside, and you either get to side or don't side with the protest. It really doesn't matter. Like I said, this is just a morality decision. It doesn't change anything throughout the game if you decide to or do not. It pretty much is a protest against your brother Logan, which is the king of Albion right now. And he is just pretty much a big piece of shit. So they're just trying to get him to pretty much represent their people, but he just does not want to. So, which does play a role a little bit later in this. After you head to the training room, you get to do some combat with Walter, and it's pretty much the same basic stuff. Don't expect anything different from Fable 1 and 2, so I'm not going to go all too into it. It's literally just the same type of combat. I will go into the new abilities and stuff that they add, but aside from that, it's pretty much the same thing. But after you guys are done training, Walter ends up getting called into a meeting with Logan. And this is where you go with your girlfriend and you guys sneak to go watch the meeting. And pretty much in the meeting, he talks about that he just wants to kill every protester that ended up showing up because, you know, bad guy bad, so we have to do bad guy stuff. So he ends up saying he's going to kill everyone at the meeting, at the protest, and Walter is against it, and then they beat up Walter, and then you break in and you stop the meeting pretty much. And this is where one of the actual major decisions come into play. This one actually does do something to the game. So pretty much you have to decide, because Logan said if you want to be treated like an adult, you have to make adult decisions. So you have to decide if your girlfriend gets executed or all the protesters that went. I chose the girlfriend to be the one that gets to live, so all the protesters ended up dying. Elf on them, I guess. I don't really know. I don't really care. It doesn't have a morality, this one, so it's really up to you what you want to decide. There's no evil decision here. I feel like it would have been kind of funny to let the person decide neither survive. That would be somewhat of an interesting outcome, but no, they didn't have that. So either one dies or the other group dies. It's really up to you. But after you do this, your character is pretty peeved after, you know, pretty much sentencing to a whole bunch of people to their death. So you head back to your room and go to sleep, which you are woken up that night by Jasper and Walter, and you guys head to your parents' cemetery. And once you head in, it depends on what type of hero you played in the first game. I played a male hero for the second game, so you end up getting the seal from your father, which leads you to a secret passage that goes underground. Once you grab this is when your first ever magic comes into play, which is the fireball, which is the basic attack from each and every game that is usually the first one that you get each and every time. After you get the fireball attack, you end up heading through the passage and you just kill a whole bunch of bats with the fire to pretty much show you how to use it. It's pretty basic stuff, just like I said. It's just like the original game, so I'm not going to go all too much into it. You literally just kill a whole bunch of bats with it, and then you head on. After you head on, you end up getting to the end of it, and you hit this button, and it brings you to a new special place, which is another thing I absolutely hate, the hub. When you hit the hub, it is one of the worst places I've ever seen, and is by far one of the biggest annoyances of the game. When you get into the hub, there is the pause menu that you get to go into, and pretty much a weapon rack. It's kind of cool to see like where you can go into this one special room where you get to choose which weapon you want to use, magic, stuff like that. They also have a new appearance room and all that you get to go into. It's somewhat cool. Don't get me wrong, the idea is interesting, but the way they put it in is absolutely terrible. The only other two rooms they have is a social room where you get to go buy stuff with Xbox points, which is a whole bunch of cringe crap where it's just cosmetics in the game. By far one of the most annoying things, and it's pretty gross. I hate that type of stuff in any type of game. Mostly when it's a single player game, it makes it even worse. This game had a lot of cosmetics and stuff to buy for like animals and stuff. Never spend your money on that type of stuff. It's just not worth your time, mostly even now. But the only other room is a treasury where you get to check out all your gold, which is kind of cool. It fluctuates, and if you get to the top, there's like a special key you can grab, and then when you spend it all, there's a weapon that you can get at the end of it, which is kind of cool. I like it. I like the idea around that type of stuff. It makes it a little bit more interesting and fun to play through. But here's the negatives. The hub, anytime you go into that, is a huge loading screen fest. So when you pause, instead of it bringing you to a pause menu, it brings you to the hub. So no matter what, you have to wait for a load time to load into this area to walk around. And then you have to go to the settings on the side, and that's how you quit instead. So it's pretty annoying how they have it set up like that. So anytime you want to pause, it brings you there. You walk around to get whatever you need, and then you unpause to get back into the game. It can sound convenient, but it's not. Because every time you pause, you have to go to a different room. Like, let's say you want a weapon, you pause, so you have to load, and then you have to load again to get whatever weapon you want to use. And let's say you need to go to the treasury after. There's another loading screen. Oh, and then maybe you want to check out stuff that's in the store. There's another loading screen. Oh, maybe I want to change my outfit as well. Boom, there's another loading screen. And then let's get back into the game. Boom, there's another loading screen. There's so much loading at this part. It is absolutely annoying. I don't know who thought this was a good idea, but I hope they never work on game design ever again, because it is the most god-awful thing. It would have been different if this came out on like the Xbox One or something like that, because the loading screens wouldn't have been all too unbearable. Like, don't get me wrong, when I'm playing on the Xbox One, these are like seamless loads. But on like Xbox 360, you're sitting there for like 5 to 10 seconds each and every load time just to get into the next room, depending on how fast your Xbox is working. And I'm guessing people around this time do not have systems that work at like, top speed anymore. So it is just a huge annoyance, and it brings into the next thing, which is pretty much the leveling system, which we'll talk about after we meet the next character, Sabine. So after you do the loading screen fest, you end up getting to the map that's also in the hub, which is another load screen. Once you press into it, you can press on wherever you want to go on the map, which is pretty cool. I love the look of the map. It's absolutely beautiful, and it plays into key details of the game that are actually pretty fun, which I will go into as well later. But you just choose where you have to go, which is the mountains. You're going to make your first allies for the revolution against your brother Logan. And when you head there, you get to meet the character Sabine. Sabine is a pretty chill dude. He seems like a hard ass, but he's not all too bad of a person once you actually get to meet him. And pretty much all he tells you is that if the only way he'll help you is if you support him first. And this is what you're going to find out throughout the game. This is pretty much the way to get any allies for the revolution, is you have to do stuff for them to join you. And Sabine has some basic tasks for you to do. Sabine is another amazing character. Same with his protector, Boulder. They are absolutely great characters. Like I said, this game has one of the best casts I have seen throughout the series. After you talk about Sabine and you get the quest, this leads into by far the worst part of the game, and that's the path to rule. There's only one positive, honestly, of this area, and that is that you get to see Teresa again. And this is also added on to the hub, so here's another loading screen on top of that. You're welcome. So once you get into this place, it is pretty much a leveling place where you go and use your guild seals, which are new leveling up system. Instead of orbs that you collect, instead you collect seals, which you can upgrade anything you want instead of it being set particular stuff with the particles and stuff that you got in the prior games, which is okay. I mean, I kind of liked how they did it with the orbs and stuff from the prior games, but if they wanted to try something else out, that is completely fine with me. But once you get into it, you'll notice that this place absolutely fucking sucks. I mean, it is by far the worst spot in the game. Once you get into it, you get to decide what you want to level up. You can either level up your melee, magic, you can even get appearances and stuff like that. And this is where the issue comes in. Any interaction Like if you want a friendship or relationship in this game, you have to wait. Like you have to wait until you're far enough into the game to do that. It's the same thing with jobs. You cannot work, or you cannot have a lot more money from working jobs unless you level it up. It's the same thing with damage and everything else. It's the same thing with like expressions, different dye colors for your outfits, stuff like that. You cannot use them unless you level up. And this would be fine as like a system where, oh, okay, I get a level up. But then they have it against a wall where you cannot level up certain things unless you've progressed the story enough. So in the prior games, you could deck yourself out and be very OP by the end of the game, or even at midway through the game, you could be stronger than everyone around you. And I like that because it lets you decide. It is an RPG after all. You get to decide if you want to be very OP or be on par with the enemies around you, or even weaker than the enemies around you, which I really like throughout the prior games. But in this game, it is a forced upon you thing where you're going to, no matter what, be on par with the enemies or weaker than them. You don't get to decide that in this game. It's the same thing with everything else as well. Like if you want to have a relationship, like I said, you have to wait until you get far enough into the game. If you want to buy businesses as well, which is one of my favorite things to do throughout the games, you cannot do that unless you progress throughout the game. Why? Why is all this behind a wall? This makes no sense, and I'm not sure what the decision making was around this. I get that they wanted the game to feel like it was fair and probably to make the game last a little bit longer because the game is very short. So I'm guessing maybe that was a way around it, is by putting this type of bullshit throughout it so that you cannot progress the game, so you don't beat it immediately. But the way they did it was by far the worst decision in the game. I don't like the idea that I am not going to be able to be stronger than these enemies just because. And it's the same thing with like working a job. I loved how they did it in the prior game, where if you work the job, you level up and then you make more money. Like you just had to work the job to get those levels. But now it's not even about that. It's literally just, oh, did you level up? Oh, okay, now you get more money. You leveled up on your character. Nice job. Oh, but you want to make more than that? Oh, well, you got to wait until you're on Act 3. It makes no sense, but that's how they decided to do it with every single leveling in this game, and I absolutely fucking hate it. It is one of the most frustrating things to deal with, but aside from that, there is some other key details, we're going to be getting into that later, that are almost on the same level of annoyance. But let's get back onto the main story. So pretty much what we have to do is go off into a couple different directions for Sabine to join our rebellion. The first thing we need to do is get the artifact and then bring it back to him. This will be the music box that you find in the prior game that Teresa uses to pretty much give you the wishes, which is a cool little hit to like back history and all that. I think it's kind of cool to see like stuff from the other games. It's kind of like a little bit nostalgic to see it. But after you get there, you finally get to see some new and interesting things about the weapons. The weapons in this game are pretty generic, just like in the prior games, but there's a unique twist to them. So this time around, they decided to add these like little like quests and challenges that you can do for your weapon to level them up. I think it's kind of a cool idea, but the issue is some of these challenges are just absolutely terrible. Like, it's stuff that you're probably not going to be able to do in your playthrough, or it's going to take a long while to get it done. Like, some of them are like, make 30 best friends in the game. Now, this sounds pretty easy, but this is where it kind of gets annoying. So you have to go and talk to a person for maybe like 2 to 3 minutes, get the relationship all the way up, and then they give you a quest to go do, and that can take another 2 to 3 minutes to do, and then you have to go all the way back to them, so that's another like minute on top of that, and then you give them the present or whatever may be that they are looking for. So it is pretty tedious and repetitive for certain things. Other things are like do critical hits and stuff like that. At least those ones are at least based around the weapon. I wish that the challenges that you had were a little bit more based on what you're actually using instead of What's something random we can throw in? Oh, they need 300,000 gold to use this weapon upgraded. Like, it's stuff like that that's just really random that they just throw in just to make it take a little bit longer. If not, it's just pretty much really annoying to throw it in like that. But it does make the weapons at least look cool. And if you don't end up liking the look of the weapon, you can pretty much restart from a checkpoint and then redo it, and then it gives you a different weapon. The game was basing it around the idea that it was going to be unique and made for your character each and every time, but it's not really unique. It's literally just randomly generated, so that whole thing was kind of a lie, but it's kind of whatever. At least it looks cool, and it makes the fighting and combat a little bit more enticing to make you keep playing even after you beat the game. So that at least there's one positive to it. But after you return the music box to Sabine, you end up having to go to Rebel Camp, and you have to take out these bandits that are pretty much stopping the supply chain that is going to Sabine's land. So pretty much what you have to do is just run through, kill a whole bunch of bandits, and this is where another interesting thing comes into the game that either you're going to think it's interesting or it's not. The only reason why I don't think it's interesting is for this key detail. So at the end of the fight that you end up having with the bandit boss, there is a decision either to let him live or kill him. So this is not only a morality thing, but also something else that was supposed to be pretty unique and I thought was interesting the first time I played through, but it ends up being very disappointing later on. So the idea is if you leave him alive, he can quote unquote join your army with his bandits for the revolution by the end of the game. Now, all this sounds cool and fine and dandy. I actually thought this was an amazing idea, but let me tell you here, none of that stuff happens in the game. None of it actually matters. Spoiler, it literally doesn't do anything. I don't understand why they set it up this way. It sounded interesting. It was like, oh, okay, so if I keep him alive, he'll actually join me in the revolution at the end. You don't see him. You don't see any of his troops. You don't see any of that. So it's kind of just really doesn't matter if you let him live or die. It really just comes down to morality. So don't expect this guy to show up and help you in the revolution later on. It's the same thing with every other side quest that you'll see. It's interesting that they have this system set in place where every time you do a side quest, they quote unquote join your army. It sounds interesting enough, but when you actually get to it, only the key ones actually show up. So that would be Sabine and a couple of the other major hitters, which I will be going on into later, which is really disappointing. So it just feels like what a waste of potential that was there, and why even set it up this way if it actually was not going to make any difference later on in the game. At least in my opinion, I think it was just a waste of time if it's not going to actually do anything to progress the story or add any type of interest to it later on. But at least there's some positives around this area. One thing that's actually pretty interesting, when you're getting the music box, you meet a character named Samuel, and he runs the library in Brightwall. And Brightwall is pretty much supposed to be the place that ends up sending supplies to help Sabine's people. And there's something interesting at this point in time that I actually really enjoy and hope to see in the next game. And this is the promise system. So pretty much what happens, after you do a decent amount of side quests, you end up pretty much showing that you are reliable and that you are willing to help the people. And pretty much at this point in time, they ask you for favors, and this is what you call a promise. So pretty much after the rebellion, these promises come into play, and it's pretty much whatever they want. So with Brightwall, it will be they want the library restored and some other things. And Sabine wants like a safer paths and stuff for his people so they are able to leave the mountains and stuff. I honestly think the system is pretty cool, and I really enjoyed that they added something that at least added some type of character to the game. If only it was a little bit more fleshed out, and you'll see what I mean later. Sadly, these systems are really cool, but the game is stupid short, so it can't really get to the full potential of it. But after you sign the promise with Samuel, and you end up signing the promise with Sabine, you can head off into the next area. Before we get there, I want to say one thing I think that is also a positive about these games is the side missions. They are absolutely amazing and just fun and goofy little things on the side that you can either do or don't. Well, by do or don't, I mean you have to do them no matter what, because the game kind of forces you to do so, which is iffy for certain people. If you're trying to go through a fast experience, this game is not going to allow you. You need to follow side quests to get further progression through the game, which I am personally fine with because they're quick and easy. So you'll do like random stuff like kicking chickens, like in the originals, like you get the chicken chaser title and stuff for doing so. And, like killing bandits or going into caves to save people's kids, stuff like that. It's like basic little things. The only other things that you really find in Brightwall that are somewhat of interest are like collectibles. Like you have to collect these books for Samuel for the academy. It's okay. They're not really all too interesting of side quests, but it's something on the side to do. It's the same thing with like these gnomes that you can shoot. You'll end up meeting a guy that has a whole bunch of gnomes. It isn't as interesting as Fable 2 with the gargoyles, but at least they have something on the side for you to do. And they also have like another one that you'll get way later on in the game, and it's like flowers. It's all just like kind of whatever stuff. At least the flower ones add lore to the game, which is kind of cool. Like, I guess the books do a little bit, but the gnomes are pretty much just kind of annoying. So if you really like doing collectibles, at least there's a lot there for you. I think it's a little too excessive in this one compared to the original when they only had like 50 of them, but now they're just like, here's like 90 different things to collect. It's not as exciting that way, at least in my opinion. But after you're done helping Sabine and Samuel, you end up heading to Railcart, and pretty much it is supposed to lead you to the city. And I think it's kind of cool how like the industrial vibe is set up. Sadly, I'm just not all too interested in it because I love the medieval vibe that Fable 1 and 2 gave. I feel like this game did progress a little too far, at least for me. But at least there's some interesting stuff that happens. When you get into the cave to go on the rail cart with Walter, ends up getting attacked by, you wouldn't guess, the Hobbs. So these are something that was in the prior game, which I always thought they were awesome. It's one of my favorite enemies, at least in the games. You end up finding them after you have to head down farther into the cave because the rail carts got destroyed. So you have to somehow still get to the city. So you head down there, you kill a whole bunch of Hobbs, and at least there's some humor at this part, like this part with Walter.
I don't think you're going to find a way round this time. But I've got some magic of my own. Watch and learn. Boom! Oh. It worked.
And aside from that, it just gives you the vibe that at least the combat is still really fun, at least in my opinion. Same with like the magic and stuff. Even though all of them are a little bit dumbed down, but at least there's some positives with the magic, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. And that is that you get to mix two different magics, like spells together, and it's really cool. Like you can find a whole bunch of different variants that actually do something, and it's really interesting. The only thing I don't like about it, honestly, is that you have to wear gloves now. It's such a small detail, but I hate the idea that you have to wear gloves to do the magic now in this game, when in the original, technically, it's all being done by you. But it's still really cool to see, and I love like mixing like hail with tornado or fire with tornado. It's just like really cool stuff that is just on the side that at least made the spells a lot more interesting than they were in Fable 2. I think Fable 2 did it the most iffy, but Fable 1, you can really never top it unless you had all the same spells and more on top of that. Because Fable 1 did so much with the magic that was actually interesting. But after you fight a decent amount of Hobbs, you can end up heading out into a new area, and this is where you meet your next ally in the rebellion. So after fighting a whole bunch of Hobbs and getting out of the cave, you end up in Morningwood, which is a haha funny name. Pretty much when you get to this place, you end up heading to a fort where there is a whole bunch of quote-unquote exiled type of troops that are there. At least that's what the feeling is, because they're pretty much sent there to pretty much die, because there's just an undead force that keeps coming back every single night that attacks the fort. So it pretty much is just exile for people that Logan does not want in the city anymore. And this is where you meet Major Swift and Ben Finn. Major Swift and Ben Finn are also really good characters. Like I said, at least one positive about this game, honestly, is just the cast is just really fun and really enjoyable to like meet and deal with. And this is around the halfway point of the game, which is really telling on how short the game is, honestly. You're almost to the rebellion point, which is kind of insane. But pretty much what you do here is you defend the fort and then you sign a promise that doesn't even really come to fruition later on, which is interesting. It's one of the only, actually, is the only promise that really doesn't lead to anything, really. But it is a really fun part, just like fighting through the undead. It also unlocks a side mission where you get to meet the two brothers that you've seen in Fable 2 that's brought back the undead and stuff. It's a cool callback to prior games, and I really like that. At least they had something interesting to throw in. And it's not even just one side quest with them, you get to do a couple. And like I said, that is another positive about the game, is honestly the side quests are really fun, but the game is just too short. But after you fight through the Morningwood, you end up in Bowerstone, and you are in the industrial district. So you get to kind of see how the industry has taken over the city. And it looks pretty cool. I just think the coloring and stuff are a little bit dead in the game, so it kind of looks just like grim. And I get that's the idea around it, is to show that the city is pretty much ruled in pretty much terrible state by Logan's regime. And there's also another person that runs it that we'll go into in a couple seconds. After you go through a decent amount of the industrial district, you end up finding someone talking about starting a rebellion. He was like, we shouldn't be treated like this. They have children working inside factories and stuff like that. Awesome move, by the way. So you're just pretty much going around, and then after you hear him talking about the rebellion, he ends up getting shot by a man named Reaver.
Thing for it. We have to stand up to Reaver.
But lying down is so much easier than standing up. My dear friends, in order to raise morale, I am offering prizes to the most deserving workers. The rules that will govern what I like to call the Reaver Team Spirit Award are these. Firstly, any worker that so much as murmurs another complaint will be shot. Secondly, any worker who takes more than a 3-second break will be shot. Thirdly, any worker who breaks any other rules I have yet to formulate will, yes, you guessed it, be shot. They return to work now. As you know, I'm a generous man and likely to start handing out prizes right away. So go on, shoo, be off with you. Chop, chop.
That's why we're here. That's why Albion needs you.
Reaver is from Fable 2, and it's awesome to see him back. Reaver is one of my favorite characters that ended up showing up way too late into the story, so they really didn't flesh him out in the second one. It was cool to see him. He was a really interesting character, but he was only around for like 20 minutes of the game, and then the game ends. So it was kind of disappointing in that light. So I'm happy they brought him here and they fleshed him out a little bit more. And it makes sense that he is here. Like, out of any character that they could have brought back, he's the only one that actually makes sense, just because of his contract he made with those demons in the second game, where he steals the use from others and puts it back into himself. So it's awesome to see him back again. And of course, he's going to be an antagonist. But at least there is a little bit interesting to it. So after you end up seeing him get shot, you end up going into the sewers where you meet the next person that is going to join your rebellion. But this is where you end up meeting another character named Paige. She is iffy, she's an alright character. Her and Ben have a quote-unquote love interest, at least Ben's interested in her. She gets introduced way too late into the game for me to be all too interested in, honestly. There is one other character that gets introduced even later, and I could never get any interest. I barely even remember the name of them just because of how boring they were. Like, just because you don't have enough time to actually get introduced to the character. But pretty much the way to get Paige to join your team is the same way as every other character. You have to do a side quest for her. So you go around doing a whole bunch of side quests, and this is where one of the best side quests in the game at least come into play. And by best in the game, I mean it's the best out of all the Fable games, at least in my opinion. You meet these three dudes, they're playing like a D&D style game, and they shrink you down and throw you into the game, and you play through a whole story. It's really interesting, the plot is fun, and everything is very unique. I really enjoyed this part, and I wish they would have played more into this with the rest of the side missions. Don't get me wrong, there's like some other interesting ones, like where you're doing a storybook type thing where a whole bunch of ghosts are telling a play and you have to follow what the play parts are. That one's pretty fun as well. But aside from those, there's nothing all too interesting that's like this. At least in my opinion, this one at least was really unique, and every time I play through the game, I'm happy to get back to that part. But after you do a couple more side quests, you head back to Paige, and she has one more quest for you to do, and that is follow her to Reaver's house. It's pretty much where they're going to be having a party, and she wants to pretty much kill off Reaver. So you put on a costume and you sneak in with her, and you end up finding out this place is a trap, and it pretty much introduces the arena style that they've had in every single Fable game. By the way, every Fable game has to have some type of arena, even this one. This one by far is the most uninspired out of the three. I think it just spins a wheel, it picks an enemy that you fight, you go into the room, you kill it, and then you leave. Over and over again, you do that for maybe 10 to 20 minutes worth of gameplay time. And this is where you notice that, yeah, if you didn't level up, it's going to be a major pain in the ass because the enemies are actually pretty hard, and they introduce enemies that I think are kind of bizarre to introduce so early on because they haven't even come into the plot yet. But whatever they want to do, they can have fun with whatever they want to set it up as. It's their game after all, but it was really weird to see like the desert type of enemies, mostly when they were never even introduced into the game yet. But they also show off some enemies that are from prior games, which were the Balverines. It was cool to see them at least, and they at least play some type of a role inside the plot, so it was fun to see them. But pretty much what ends up happening after you fight through, Reaver ends up escaping and he kills everyone else by turning them into Balverines that end up attacking you. After you free her friend, you end up just getting the promise that you have to sign for her, which I think is kind of bullshit. After all that help that you gave her, she still expects you to give her even more. Out of any characters, I think it was the most unfair out of all of them because you help her the most. But she ends up having another promise where you'll have to set up the industrial industry in a better way than it is now, which is interesting, and I like how they play a morality on those types of things. But this is where you end up hearing about pretty much everyone has to head to the castle. There's going to be like an important announcement. So everyone heads off to the castle to see Major Swift getting executed. This part was somewhat interesting, but it leads into a really fast-paced motion of the story just like wrapping up really fast. So pretty much what ends up happening after Major Swift dies, you head back to the sewer area, and then you guys are pretty much escaping to a boat to find Aurora, which is another location that is magically thrown into the game way late into the game. And I mean way late. So you head to Aurora, or you have to head there. You have to fight through a whole bunch of enemies first. After you do so, you, Walter, and Ben head off to this location. Your ship ends up getting destroyed by a whole bunch of boats following. They end up shooting cannons at you, and the ship ends up sinking. But somehow you magically still end up in Aurora. I don't really understand that part, but whatever. It's part of the plot. Why not? But you end up crash landing there. You end up finding Walter and your dog, and you head through. And this is where some of the interesting stuff with the plot at least comes into play, but I think it was way too late into the game. So this is where you end up meeting Walter again. You both crash around the same area, and Ben is just nowhere to be found. You end up heading out and find this ruins area, and it leads into a cave. So Walter ends up picking up a book, and he reads a couple of the pages, and it ends up opening this shield that was covering the cave. and they head down into it, which ends up leading to a lot of disaster later on. So when you head into the cave, you end up seeing that there's like this weird darkness that's going on that's like causing shadows to spawn and stuff that are aggressive towards you. It's kind of like a horror vibe, and it honestly did it really well. I thought it was really cool when I first ever saw this, and it leads you to the major enemy of the game, which isn't even your brother anymore. It's the guy named Crawler. It's a lot more interesting than I thought it was going to be. I think the only issue with this character though is it was introduced way too late into the plot for it to be as like substantial or important for me. At least in my opinion, if it was introduced maybe hours before that, or it had some type of hints to it, but they had no hinting at it. It was just immediate, like, here's this enemy, and he's going to be the aggressor throughout the rest of the game. He ends up wounding Walter really bad around this area. You actually think he dies at first, but you end up making it out of the cave with him after fighting a whole bunch of the shadow demons. I think they're somewhat interesting, but they're hella weak. They actually did imply them in Fable 2. I remember fighting some type of enemies like this, so it was cool to at least see some enemy come back and have a lot more of a plot to it and like interest to it, if that makes any sense. So it was at least cool in that light. But after you guys head out of the cave, Walter's way too weak and he can't see anymore. He's completely blind, so you have to carry him. He ends up telling you to leave him, but you get to decide if you want to or not. No matter what, you're going to leave him. It ends up dropping him, but it's a morality thing for you again. Like, it really doesn't matter what you decide here. But you end up heading into the desert after, and the darkness just keeps attacking you over and over again, showing you death of everyone, like all your cities ruined and all that. It's actually really cool. I actually really enjoy how this is set up. And then your character ends up passing out, and you end up in the city of Aurora. When you wake up, you end up meeting the character Kaylin, and this is the person that runs Aurora, and she gives you pretty much the rundown of the whole like city. It was pretty interesting, but I think they just didn't play into it enough for it to be like very exciting. Like when you wake up, she ends up telling you about the darkness and how it's been plaguing her lands for a long time, and Logan has actually been there prior to you being there. And he promised to come and help them, and he just never came back to help them. And you find out why Logan is technically the big bad guy, and he doesn't really show, he's just very fierce and all that. And you kind of get the reason why now at this point in time, because he's pretty much trying to protect the city as much as possible, while he's going to be willing to sacrifice the rest of the people. He's pretty much making the decision that only certain people will survive at the end of the day, so we are going to decide which ones are actually going to make it through, which I think is a admirable idea. Like, he is technically still a good guy. It's just the situation he was dealt was way too bad to the point where he didn't know how to deal with it himself. So you pretty much get sent around the city to walk around and find out more about like the darkness and stuff in Aurora. It literally takes, I mean, like a minute of just walking around, and that's it. And then she's just like, now you understand why we're in this situation. It's like, no, not really. It really didn't add enough to make it interesting. But right after that, she ends up asking you to make the promise so that she'll join the rebellion with you that your brother decided not to follow through with, which I think is fair enough to give her the promise. The only thing I always thought was bizarre is you cannot decline the promises, but you'll see why later, so at least it makes sense why you couldn't. So you end up signing the promise, and then boom, immediately into the rebellion. You're at the castle fighting a whole bunch of enemies that are under Logan's reign, and it's like immediate, like you're one spot here, and then boom, you're into the next spot where you're fighting enemies. It's very abrupt, and it shows you how like quickly the game was rushed, because when you get to this area after you kill all the enemies, and then boom, you take over the castle. It is insanely fast. It's an interesting part. I honestly think the rebellion of the castle was really fun to fight through, but it was really, really fast. And you can tell that they didn't have the time. They were definitely on a time crunch with this spot. But this is where I was talking about before, like with like the bandit and all the other side missions. You quote unquote get these people as allies. You don't see them anywhere at this point in time. They don't show up at all. And it's just like, well, so you're telling me that you placed this in place and then it just doesn't do anything towards the plot? Okay, thanks a lot. So you don't see any of the bandits. You do see Sabine's troops, you see Paige's troops, and you see the Auroran troops. That's the only ones you see. Aside from them, you do see Major Swift's troops, even though he died. Ben took his place, so his troops followed him instead. And aside from that, you don't see any of the other people that you helped. It would have been cool if you helped all of them and then there was like some crazy cutscene with them, but no, nothing. You don't see them ever again. They have no major plot to it. So helping them or not helping them really does not have any type of impact, which is very disappointing, at least in my opinion. But after you run through that, you end up heading to the castle, and this is where you end up making Logan step down. And this is when you become king. I mean, it's abrupt. You become king immediately. So after you take over king, you end up getting a new butler. It's not just Jasper anymore. You have this other dude. And he pretty much tells you the state of the castle and how broke you guys are. You guys have, I think, 500,000 sitting in the chambers, which is not that much when you think about it. Like, it looks like a lot at this point in time. It's like, oh, that's crazy. That's actually a lot of money. But you'll find out 2 seconds later, that's actually not that much because of how expensive the end game is. And I mean expensive. So around this time, you end up starting to become like the king. So you have to make decisions for the city and the well-being of your people. It's really interesting. And I really like this part of the game. But like I said, the game is stupid short. This part is maybe an hour, maybe an hour and a half if you really are pushing it for like length time. So pretty much all you have to do is make a whole bunch of decisions. Like you have to decide if the promises that you made were worthwhile and worth actually keeping, or just if you want to disregard them. It really comes down to what your morality was trying to be. If you really want to keep your morality high, you have to follow through with every promise, which I will go into a second. But the last thing that you actually get to do is decide if your brother gets to live or not. And if you do so, it doesn't do anything. If you don't, it doesn't do anything. It really doesn't matter. Like I said, like these things are interesting and it's fun for the plot, but it doesn't play anything into the role. So it's just like, what is the point of making these decisions if they don't do anything? Yeah, sure, I get a halo above my head or devil horns instead if I decide one or the other, but it's not as impactful as Fable 2 was. Like, if you decided to help the church in Fable 2, it would end up evolving into something big and beautiful. But if you decided not to help it, it would all go into ruins. That's interesting. It's the same thing with the fortress that you end up finding in Fable 2. If you help them, it ends up growing in power, but if you decide not to, you end up destroying the whole thing. It adds to the intrigue of the game. But sadly, with Fable 3, it seemed to want to do that, but it just wasn't there yet. Like, I guess with following the promises, like, you end up meeting with Sabine, Paige, and, the rest of the people to decide the fates of their people in the cities. You do get to see the upgrades, at least in that part, but there is other key things I wish they would have built into, but they just never did. So pretty much at this point, you get to decide if you want to help or not. The issue with being a helper is you are not going to have enough money. You need to work. And I mean by work, I mean you have to sit there for at least 2 to 3 hours at a job in the game. Unless you've been buying buildings and collecting money from your industry, you are screwed at this part. There is so much money that you have to end up spending on the city. I think it's like 6 to 7 million, and you still have to have like 5 million sitting in the bank account to make sure everyone survives. It's absolutely insane. It's a lot of money, and it's a lot of time to be spending to do so. And they don't set you up for this at all. And mind you, you want to do this before you do any of the promises, like go collect this money, because if you end up doing all the promises, end up at the court, around like the day 50, it automatically goes into endgame. There's no telling of that happening. It's just immediate. So you have like 50 days left. You're like, okay, so we're going to be ready within these next 50 days for the attack. But no, boom, right into the end game. It's insane. It doesn't give you any type of talk before. It's like, you need to be ready for this because we're going into endgame right now. No, they don't do that. They immediately throw you into it. They do give you a couple side things to collect money, like you end up going to Aurora and finding a diamond. It doesn't add all too much money because immediately after, someone asks for all of the money you just got from that mission for the next promise. It's insane. And then there's another one where you help some rich lady. All that money you just got is immediately gone. You get it from a Balverine mission with her, which is at least somewhat interesting. But it just shows that they really didn't set this up right. They pretty much expected you to be buying businesses. At least personally, I was a huge industry freak in Fable 2 and 3, so it was easy for me. But people that weren't building up for that and were just playing through the plot are going to get a rude awakening by the end of the game, which really sucks because this does actually have consequences if you do not give them money. Or if you don't have enough to save the people, it has major consequences, and I'll tell you why. So pretty much after you do all the promises, you decide if you want to or not. I decided to do all of them, so I get a halo above my head. I was a good boy. But if you decided not to, you get your devil horns. And then you fight the darkness, which ends up being the main antagonist at the end. This part, maybe it's like 10 to 15 minutes of you just fighting through shadow enemies, and it's showing you like death and like what would happen and what is going to happen to your people. It's somewhat interesting, but it's not that great. Honestly, this part is pretty iffy. The darkness was at least introduced to be really cool, but the last mission for it was not all too interesting. But you end up seeing the crawler. He ends up crawling inside of Walter's mouth, which is awesome. It's really cool to see. And you pretty much have to fight Walter and kill him to pretty much end the game. Sadly, no matter what, Walter is going to die at this point, and I think that is another misstep by the people that made the game. If you decided to follow through and do all the missions and get the halo above your head and stuff, and you were able to save everyone, you should have been able to save him. I think that's how they should have changed it, because it's not like they were going to make a sequel to this, so I don't understand why it had to follow through with that type of plot. And plus, being good or evil has no weight on this part, because you don't get to decide if he dies or not. You kill him no matter what, which is stupid. But aside from that, after you do that, if you decided to follow through with the promises, this decides if people are going to show up to his grave when he dies or if they're not. I decided to follow through with the promises, so everyone shows up to his graveyard, and if you didn't, everyone's just gone. You end up talking to Teresa one more time, and that pretty much wraps up the game. Now, what I wanted to get into is right here. If you decided not to have any money by the end of the game, I am not even joking you, the whole map is going to be empty. There's not going to be a single person in sight. And it's so stupid. Like legit, the whole castle's empty, Aurora's empty, everywhere. I get the idea is because it had a major consequence. It's like, hey, if you don't spend your money and get all that money to save up, there is not going to be a single person alive. And they weren't even joking. It was completely empty around the castle. But this not only ruins one thing, but it ruins another, and that is that missions, like side quests that are all left around the map, are completely empty. I guess there is a way to make them respawn. I guess if you wait a long while, they'll end up respawning later on, but every single person is going to hate you because you pretty much let the city down and everyone ended up dying. I think it's just stupid, and it just wasted so much time. I think if you had enough money to pay off all the debts and stuff for the promises, that should have been enough, but they also wanted you to have extra money sitting on top of that, which is absolutely insane in my opinion. But it really comes up to you what ending you were trying to get. If you're trying to be evil, then this is an easy spot. It doesn't really matter what you do, unless you just take all the money out of the vault that you end up getting, then everyone is going to survive. But if you're trying to play for a good ending, you're going to have to spend a lot of money. But there's no reason for the good ending, honestly, aside from the people still being there and your wife still being around, because Walter still ends up dying no matter what, which I think is really disappointing. But overall, was Fable 3 really the worst in the series? There is still some key games that were worse, like the Connect game and Fable, I think it's Legends, the little puppet ones that are 10 times worse. But for the mainline games like that are Fable 1, 2, and 3, 3 is by far the worst. I think the game had a lot of potential. I think it was just way too rushed. There is a lot of stuff that they try to do that could have been interesting and really fun to play through, but they just didn't have the time. And it really shows with this game. There's a lot of stuff that's really interesting and really fun to still do. The music's enjoyable. You get a lot of like random secrets from like the old games, like you get to see Chesty again from Fable 2. Stuff like that. It's really fun and memorable, but it's just not enough there to pretty much pull you in for more than one playthrough of the game just to wrap up the story. Personally, I still play through it all the time whenever I go through Fable 1 and 2, but that's just because I enjoy playing through all three. If I'm going to get the experience, I want to get it all. Even though every time I get to Fable 3, it feels worse and worse every time I go through it, which is really sad because I really enjoyed it when I was younger, but I can finally see every single flaw with the game. But if you guys enjoy the content, make sure you leave a like and a sub. And if you have anything to suggest to make videos on for like later date videos, make sure to leave them down in the comments down below. But I think the next video is going to be on Brutal Legends. I did hint at it at the beginning, but we'll see about that. But I'll see you guys next time. See ya.